It was once said that all cattle in the U.S. trace their lineage back to the first Spanish bulls left in Florida. The Seminoles have raised cattle since the 16th century when the Spanish introduced them. Being a tribe with a matrilineal clan-based culture, Seminole women have always played a role in the Seminole cattle ranching, with records dating back over 100 years. Although not the first Seminole ancestor to engage in cow keeping, Ahia was among Florida's most successful. Ahia was born to the Hitchiti-speaking Oconee, who resided in a town now known as Oconee Old Town on the Oconee River in central Georgia. In the late 1720s, the Oconee people relocated to Chattahoochee River to distance themselves from settlers and live among the Hitchiti and Miccosukee-speaking lower towns of the Muskogee Confederacy. Following the decimation of tribes and the collapse of the Spanish mission network in Florida, the area became a vast hunting ground. Chief Ahia, familiar with the land, sided with James Oglethorpe, the governor of the province of Georgia, in 1740 to invade the Spanish capital of St. Augustine. 3 years of fighting in the Yamasee War forced his people to relocate to Florida around St. Augustine. The Spanish and British manipulated the war effort to their advantage, with most tribes siding with the British. Discouraged by dwindling land resources, Ahia led his people south in 1750, settling near the Atlantic coast at Allucha Savannah or Payne's Prairie. This land was known for its mixed hardwood, pine hammocks, and fertile soil. Along with abundant fish and game, the Oconee found feral cattle and horses, descendants of those left behind by Spanish ranches in the early 18th century. The herds were gathered, and Chief Ahia was called the cow keeper by the British. Several towns were formed by the Oconee, with the Allucha and Lachoway being the most prominent. The Muskogee Confederation lived in Allucha, and more people united with the Oconees, collectively seen as Seminoles. Battles with the Spanish and their allies, the Yamasees and Timucua, continued. In 1757, Ahia visited the governor of the province of Georgia and expressed his hatred for the Spanish and their allied tribes, declaring that he would not find peace in the afterlife unless he killed 100 Spaniards. By 1763, Spain ceded Florida to the British following the 7 Years' War in exchange for territory west of the Mississippi River. The British recognized the lower towns in the Muskogee Confederation as the authority over the land and people of Florida. The Treaty of Picolata granted 2 million acres to the British. Although Ahia was not present for the treaty, he traveled to St. Augustine in December of 1765 with 60 of his people and stayed for 8 days. During his visit, Ahia received a great medal and other gifts and provisions from the British. Governor Grant was impressed with Ahia's intelligence and reported that they had parted on the best terms. In the following years, the Seminoles took action to defend against an influx of cattle stealing. These Seminoles managed 7,000 to 10,000 head of cattle and notably used trained cattle dogs, a practice later adopted by Florida cracker cowboys. Like other cattlemen of the era, Seminoles allowed their animals to range freely, giving rise to the term cow hunters to describe their methods. Conflicts arose between the Muskogee upper towns, known as Upper Creeks, that supported the British, while the lower creeks sided with the new United States and Old Spain. The Alachua Seminoles under Ahia, the largest of the Seminole villages, remained loyal to the British. 1783, following its defeat in the American Revolutionary War, the British returned Florida to Spain. Ahia unsuccessfully requested to accompany the British, but passed away the following year. Just before the American Revolution, the Seminoles had large herds of cattle. When Andrew Jackson was known for baiting indigenous and rustling cattle, he stole as many as 1,000 heads from the Miccosukees near Tallahassee. Until 1817, tensions between Seminoles and settlers often revolved around cattle and grazing lands. After the United States acquired Spanish Florida in 1821, the three Seminole Wars, 1817, 1835, and 1855, saw the U.S. Army under General Jessup burning crops and seizing cattle and horses. This led to the deportation of their people, with fewer than a few hundred surviving in Florida. By 1911, it was reported that there were about 50 head of stock cattle and 12 yoke of oxen in the Cow Creek country, along with many hogs. The Big Cypress Indians had 29 head of stock cattle and 10 yoke of oxen. Although they had a few hogs, panthers and bears were plentiful and prevented their increase. On open range, white cattlemen frequently stole from the Seminole who could not rectify the wrongs. One exception was a family living near Indiantown until the 1920s. Adatiger, half Creek and half Miccosukee, became a cattle woman under unfortunate circumstances. She inherited cattle from her three brothers, each of whom succumbed to tuberculosis or pneumonia between 1914 and 1919. Ada took on the responsibility of managing the family's stock, and by the mid-1920s, her herd was the largest owned by any Seminole. To support her family, Adatiger took on the management of their herd. She raised and trained 2 cow chaser dogs to help wrangle the cattle. Otherwise, she worked almost entirely unaided. Ada did not use any fences or pens. Instead, she kept the cattle well fed with corn grown by the family and maintained the area around the camp to ensure it was a place the cattle would want to stay. Twice a year in the 1920s, Ada would lead a herd of hundreds into the market at Indiantown. Accompanied by her 2 dogs, she would sell some of the cattle in town, treat the rest for ticks and fleas, and buy essential goods. Then she would walk her herd the 10-mile trip back to her camp by Lake Okeechobee. By 1927, Ada had left Indiantown, a decision born of necessity rather than desire. She had given birth to her daughter, Betty Mae Jumper, who was half white, exposing the family, especially Betty Mae, to the danger of prejudice. Ada sold as much as she could, including the cattle, abandoning the rest, buying a Ford Model T, and moving her family to the Denaya, now Hollywood, reservation. In 1936, children at the Denaya Seminole Indian School wrote about visiting her family camp, where they ate Venetian eggs with tomatoes, onions, cheese, bacon, carrot fingers, brown bread and butter sandwiches, milk and oranges for dessert. In Hollywood, Ada made crafts and souvenirs for the tourist trade and worked in the fields, picking beans and tomatoes, among other things. On the 1940 census, Ada listed her occupation as make souvenirs, living with her 80-year-old mother and 2 children. In the 1950s and 60s, Ada and her family worked at the Ocolee Seminole Indian Village, an artificial camp that showcased traditional Seminole camp life to tourists. Ada would talk about how delicious things like garfish were. She also discussed her crafting and making dolls, woodwork, and clothing to sell to tourists. During an interview, she was seen making beadwork. The author noted she wears the Seminole dress. The day is cold, but she sits on the ground in the pale sunlight. Ada was well respected in her community, but outside of it, she had to fight for her daughter to attend school. At one point, she even tried to enroll her in a black school since the white ones would not accept her. Eventually, Betty Mae went to school in North Carolina, starting at the age of 14. The renaissance of Seminole cattle began in the 1930s to support the tribe economically. 5 Seminole men spearheaded the effort on the Brighton Reservation: Frank Shore, Charlie Miko, Naha Tiger, Willie Gopher, and Willie Tiger. All 5 had ranching experience and a wealth of traditional knowledge. The United States government purchased 547 cows from Dust Bowl devastated ranches out west to start the enterprise as part of the Works Progress Administration's Indian New Deal. However, the venture faced many difficulties, and the harsh conditions of transport combined with the new and vastly different environment and poor grazing conditions of the Brighton Reservation caused incredible health problems for the herd. Only an estimated 200 head of cattle survived the first year. Despite the struggles, these Seminole cow keepers made monumental efforts to ensure the success of the cattle. They built mineral boxes to add nutrients to the grazing pastures, windmills across the reservation to pump clean water, planted higher quality grass, and installed fencing and sink wells. By 1939, over 1,000 head of cattle were listed. Soon, the Seminoles took over operation from the U.S. government. The Seminoles formed the Brighton Indian Cattle Enterprise with Charlie Miko, John Josh, and Willie Gopher as the first trustees. The Big Cypress Cattle Enterprise was later formed on the Big Cypress Reservation, led by Morgan Smith. Smith, known for his enormous size and even more significant influence, was instrumental in setting up the Big Cypress cattle operation. The next generation of Seminole cattle women was led by Ada Pierce, Lena Gopher, Arlene Johns, and Betty Mae Jumper when the Seminole tribe of Florida organized a formal cattle association in 1954 on the Brighton and Big Cypress reservations. These women were seen as equals at a time when equality was not common throughout the rest of the country. The cattle women owned their herds and took care of all the responsibilities necessary to have a successful cattle operation, from buying feed to being on the trail. Ada spent the rest of her life on the Dena'ina Reservation. She passed away at the age of 87 in 1970. Her two children, Betty Mae Tiger Jumper and Howard Tiger, grew up to become leaders and elected chairs of the Seminole tribe of Florida. This has been Biographies of the West. My name is Lorin Morgan-Richards. Thanks for watching.